Hello, my name is Brian Corliss, and I'd like to introduce you to the new science of the 21st century. It's a new model which describes the origin of the cosmos, but also extends to a real understanding of all the matter and everything else that exists within it. The first video which I present today describes, first of all, the origins of the cosmos itself, which I describe as the galactic expansion event. It is the first of many to come, and I hope you will learn from them. Thank you. In developing this model, I've started with some very basic and fundamental assumptions. The first is that the first law of thermodynamics applies to the entire universe. You may well point out that the first law only applies to a closed system. Well, as you will find out in this presentation, that the universe in fact is a closed system. This is the fundamental premise around which the entire model is built. The mass-energy equivalence suggests that energy is the property of mass, and I believe that it cannot exist in isolation. Mass and its associated energy cannot be created or destroyed, but may only be transformed from one state to another. This is the fundamental assumption of the first law of thermodynamics. There can only be one mass, and the entire cosmos is comprised of a single primary mass. This mass exhibits in two energy states: mutual attraction, meaning gravity, which is contraction, and mutual expansion, which is repulsion. Perhaps one of the most difficult things for the human mind to grasp is the fact that reality is not limited only to what we can see. There is an underlying realm beyond our visual universe. It exists in a totally different dimension or realm. These dimensions we cannot touch, we cannot see, we cannot feel, we cannot contain them, but they exist and they influence everything and all the matter around us. The following graphic representation may give a better understanding of the entire process. If we consider that the blue colour represents the primary mass of the cosmos, which I describe as nothing, which has the property of gravity. The property of gravity being mutual attraction. The primary mass of nothing is its own dimension. It is not particulate, but it is fluid in nature. It exists throughout the cosmos in all places. We cannot see it, we cannot feel it, we cannot touch it, but we know it exists because of the effect it has on everything that is around us. The property of mutual attraction means that wherever there is a discontinuity in the overall mass, or rather where one region of the mass begins to exhibit a higher mass density than it surrounds, it begins to form a point of attraction which I call the gravitational focal point. The gravitational focal point then becomes the focus for the mass that is surrounding it. It begins to attract mass in ever-increasing degrees, and the gravitational focal point becomes larger and larger. As the mass of nothing is drawn towards its GFP, the total mass surrounding it increases significantly. As it increases, the force acting on the GFP also increases. It cannot increase indefinitely, and there must be a limit to which the amount of nothing can exceed the force at its GFP. One may well now postulate the age-old saying of what happens when the irresistible force meets the immovable object. Perhaps we may now answer this by simply saying that it transforms itself into an equal and opposite direction. This transformation is in accord with the first law of thermodynamics, and I call this point of transformation as the singularity. It is a point where nothing is transformed and forced into a new dimension, which I call something, shown here in yellow. This new dimension is entirely separate and does not interact with its precursor. The something mass energy, with its property of expansion, continues to expand, and as it does so, it is reduced in its mass and energy. It will continue to expand until it almost reaches exhaustion. Again, complying with the first law of thermodynamics, it cannot become extinct, so therefore it can only transform into a new state. At this stage, when it almost reaches exhaustion, it returns back to its original state of mutual attraction. This position I call a reverse singularity. The cycle of gravitational attraction to a GFP and its transformation into the alternate dimension and its resulting return back to its original state, I call the cosmic cycle. This cosmic cycle is timeless and has no beginning and no end. It takes place in two separate dimensions throughout the entire cosmos, and in fact it is the underlying process which is behind everything. We live and exist in a physical universe of matter, and under this new model I can now explain exactly the origins of all the matter in the universe. At each singularity, a small proportion of the mass may not reach completion and becomes either stuck or combined with its opposite entity to become a neutral entity, which I describe as ether, here shown in brown. This neutral entity enters its own dimension, but being neutral and with the properties of both mutual attraction and mutual expansion, it is able to interact with both dimensions, and it becomes the bridge between the two. This is a dipole entity, and as it is formed around the GFP, it accumulates as a large shell surrounding it. As it interacts with the new expansive mass, it also is forced outwards. It is always contained within the much larger mass of nothing, which is the gravitational envelope which surrounds it. The shell of ether expands as it contains the ever-increasing mass of something from its GFP. Eventually it cannot contain this mass any further, whereupon it disintegrates, and the large flash of something energy which is released are the quasars which we observe regularly across the cosmos. The large dipole shell disintegrates into a very large number of the smaller entities, which then encapsulate small amounts of the something energy to become the element hydrogen, being the basic building block of everything we see. The hydrogen cloud so formed becomes the nursery for all the stars which form within its space and condense to form the galaxies which we can observe. This is the origin of every galaxy in the cosmos, and each galaxy is formed independently of each other. The process I described as the galactic expansion events is in fact the origin of the entire cosmos. Galaxies are formed within the much larger envelope of nothing, and its gravity controls the progress of its evolution. The centre of each galaxy is the large GFP, which we describe as its black hole. And as this black hole continues to transform from one state to another, eventually the gravitational mass is depleted. The depletion of this gravitational mass results in a slow and gradual shrinkage of every galaxy. As each galaxy is slowly shrinking and relative to its adjacent galaxies, it gives the false impression that it is expanding, when in fact it is the galaxies that are contracting. This is as we observe it from the vantage point of our star within the galaxy of the Milky Way. As the galaxy shrinks, it goes through its own evolutionary process, whereby it commences as a young galaxy, which is a state of our current Milky Way, eventually through the state of the dwarf red galaxies, and eventually be swallowed up altogether in the GFP. This cycle of galaxy formation, its evolution and its subsequent demise within each black hole represents a steady state. The steady state is timeless and will continue forever. Our perspective from our planet Earth in the galaxy of the Milky Way is entirely dependent on our observation of the physical universe of matter. We can only assume the properties of these two unseen dimensions by the effect it has on the matter around us. To get a full appreciation of the new model, you'll need to download and study the 3 books I've presented on this website. The first one, Much Ado About Nothing, presents the fundamental model describing the cosmic cycle and the galactic expansion events. The second book in the series, Something from Nothing, uses the fundamental model presented to present a new understanding of the structure and the properties of atoms. This book presents a detailed description of all the properties of all the elements in the periodic table. The third book, New Insights, examines experiments from old and more recent and reinterprets them in the light of the new model. If you study this model, I'm quite sure you'll be well on the path towards wisdom, where you'll realise that what you know or what you think you know is not what you thought.